Good morning. Morning, Thanos Dokos, National Security Advisor of Greece. Good morning, Mr. Sinan Ülgen, Director of the Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies in Istanbul. And good morning, Zenonas Tsiaras, researcher at Peace Research Institute in Oslo, Norway. And of course, thanks to Dorothee Schmidt, Senior Research Fellow, Head of Turkey and Middle East Program at the Ifri, Institut français des Relations Internationales. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question we have to answer today is complex, but absolutely fascinating. The France-Greece relationship, a new strategic partnership. It's interesting because we have the opportunity this morning to consider this question, the France-Greece relationship, seen from a Greek intellectual, a Turk intellectual, and a Cypriot, and finally, a French personality. So it will be a mixed approach, and that is what is interesting. So the first thing to do is to listen to you, ladies and gentlemen, to see what is the specific approach of each country, as you can sum it up, on this very tight question, which is the France-Greece relationship. A last word, seen from Paris, Mr. Macron has made something, let's say, new. This France-Greece relationship doesn't happen at a random. It happens in a moment when the tensions, for instance, between Turkey and France had reached a high level. I mean, the personal tensions between Mr. Erdogan, the Turkish president, and Mr. Macron. I'm not sure that the tensions between the two countries are so dense, but between the two presidents, there was a time the tensions were very difficult to solve. Maybe a first question to start, shall we see the France-Greece new partnership as a result of the tensions between France and Turkey, or shall we see them in a quite an independent way? Is there a true strategy? Forget 1 minute the question with Turkey. Is there a new strategy, a new Mediterranean strategy for Mr. Macron, like there was one which was a complete failure with Sarkozy and the famous Mediterranean Union he dreamed of? That was, once again, a complete failure. Is there something like that in Mr. Macron's mind or not? Dorothee will help us to answer this question. So the first thing to do, I think, is to listen to you, ladies and gentlemen. So we can listen to start the discussion, Mr. Dokos. Dokos, who is, I think, in Athens or not? Hello?
Hello, yes, should I start then?
You are in Athens.
I was supposed to start, Christian. So what do we do?
Oh, of course. So sorry. Yeah. It's my fault. It's my fault, and especially because I mentioned that we will start with you.
Yeah, this is just because you stole everything that I was supposed to say.
I wanted a short answer from Mr. Dokos, but that's a bad custom of the journalists to create a kind of animation artificially. So let's go to back to you, Dorothee, and listen to a very classical answer, an academic answer coming from you, but coming from you, nothing is academic. It's all systematically fascinating. So we're listening to you.
Merci, Christian. The reason why maybe I have to talk first is also that I have to give the context of the whole research project, which is of course very academic, but this last seminar is part of a wider research project that we've been doing with the Center for Applied Turkish Studies, the CATS of the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, who funded it for this year. And we embarked on a project with this German think tank in order to try and explain, that was the whole rationale of the project, trying to explain to the Germans why France and Turkey went to such a high degree of animosity in 2020, and why France took such a firm stance against Turkey while Germany was trying to mediate, or was, as our Greek interlocutors would frame it, behaved more as status quo power. So the initial ambition was more to focus on the France-Turkey relationship, but we decided that it would end with a paper on the France-Greece relationship, because we've been asked a lot by our partners, including from the UK, for instance, if there was some sort of historical, philosophical, or strategic grounds for this rapprochement between France and Greece. And then when we started to draft our last paper, the defense agreement came, which clearly beefed up the whole perspective. So what is at stake, seen from the French side with this Franco-Greek defense agreement? Again, the context is clearly the feud with Turkey. And we see that this resuming Greece-Turkey quarrel on the maritime delimitation is feeding in 2020 sort of rising hostile narrative about Turkey that's in France is, I would say, a very wide, politically wide encompassing narrative. Turkey has a very bad image in France on all sides of the political spectrum, for a series of reasons that we've been confronting with them diplomatically. There's a power competition going on in the MENA region very clearly. We went very close to military incidents off the coast of Libya in the spring of 2020. But we also have internal domestic issues with Turkey, with the perception that the Turkish government is interfering more and more into the French society and the French political life by stirring the sentiments of the Turkish diaspora. And this is something that the French President Emmanuel Macron has said publicly several times. An indicator that I always find fascinating is that now Turkey is ranked like the third cyber threat, the third country that's cyber threatening France after China and Russia. But in 2020, we had particular worries with the maritime strategy that clearly fed this strategic outlook that France had, that Turkey was a sort of expansionist power, expansionist country, behaving aggressively in the whole Mediterranean. So what was the reaction of the French state, the French administration, especially the French president? As Christian Macron mentioned, there was a personal difficulty probably between Tayyip Erdogan and Emmanuel Macron. France decided to stand firm beside Greece. This made her look as a sort of a protector showing dominance in the power competition, but it was also a way to build counter alliances against Turkey. So where does Greece matches in that way? Why does Greece matter particularly to the French at that time? What is, I think, extremely interesting is that we see that after years of difficulties, the status of Greece has changed, completely changed in the eyes of its partners, especially of France. So there are several reasons to that that do combine to make Greece a reliable and almost, I'd say, equal partner. Political resilience first. We see that Greece has accommodated rather well some the economic shock that he has undergone with the financial crisis, the Syrian refugee shock as well. So also a very strong structural geopolitical shocks. But it also has a new and stable political center-right majority. We had a political alternance in Greece, and this government can easily play as a sparring partner for Emmanuel Macron. And it also plays on the historical friendship feelings in the background that are always staged very, I'd say, heavily. So that's for the political side. There's also the economic recovery of Greece. So Greece is not only not begging anymore, it has become a client for big contracts. So when Macron goes to Athens first, in his first official visit, he brings very high-level businessmen, CEOs from many French firms to open business perspective with Greece. And in the wake of this 2020 confrontation that we've seen in the East Med, France has managed to sell weapons to Greece. As we know, the Rafale deal first, aircraft. These aircraft does really matter very much because it was the first time we managed to sell this super technological aircraft to a European country. So this was clearly presented as a breakthrough. Croatia has done a deal later on. So it mattered both commercially and symbolically. And then the frigate deal for the Greek Navy later on does also matter politically a lot because it's seen at the time as a sort of revenge after the AUKUS setback. So this is also how it's been staged in the French context. Then on the wider geological is for the gas issue, but geopolitical perspective, there are several also parameters that do play. First, as Macron suggested, France wants to consolidate the Mediterranean pillar of the EU because it's seen as a sort of subsystem that can balance in some way the German positions, especially at a post-Merkel transition time in Germany, where everybody is moving into the fog. We don't know exactly how the next coalition is going to behave. And we also can play there on mixed Greek sentiments towards the Germans. That was very clear from our interviews in Greece. But then consolidating this Mediterranean pillar also plays into a French tradition of animating the EU Mediterranean policy. Christian Macron labeled the Sarkozy's policy with the Union for the Mediterranean as complete failure. I was I was moderating a roundtable at the beginning of this week with the French Ministry of Finance, which started with a talk by the current Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. And I can tell you that it is considered as an institutional success that the Union for the Mediterranean still exists and that we can bring the Secretary General to introduce a roundtable during the French presidency of the EU. It shows consistency, time consistency of the objectives of France. And then the Greek deal goes hand in hand with the Quirinal Treaty that was signed a little later on, December. And why is that so important? Because Macron presents this as a pillar for European strategic autonomy. This is clearly, again, how the France-Green deal has been openly marketed by the government in France. We need to advance on strategic autonomy. This is one of the priorities of the French presidency of the EU, and the Greek-France rapprochement is clearly one of the pillars for this. So that is all about the Mediterranean and the EU, but we also play there beyond the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is where France is interested in the current enlarging of the Greek strategic outlook. Greece looking beyond its traditional tête-à-tête and very little tête-à-tête with the Turks, connecting with other partners in the Middle East. You know that there's also a mutual defense agreement that's been signed with the UAE, which is a very close partner of France, by the way, diplomatically. And then also the idea that we're going to bring the Greeks to Africa, as they confirmed that they would send some special forces to the Takuba force in Sahel. So this is, I'd say, the main reasons that do play for the rapprochement at a wider level than the only bilateral France-Greek story. Then quickly to introduce the difficulties that I, as an analyst, see on the way, and I'm not, of course, the only one to raise this question, and I'm very sure it's going to be the core of the debate we're going to have. First, of course, nobody names Turkey. It's the elephant in the room. It's never said explicitly that we are trying to build a sort of a front line, to consolidate the front line with Turkey. The Franco-Greek agreement brought German malaise, more German malaise. We saw that we had dissent on some files in the Middle East. Libya is difficult, for instance, but there we see clearly that the Germans protested, especially against the arms sale to Greece, considering that this is disturbing the strategic balance in the Eastern Med. Second main difficulty is how do we connect all this with NATO, of course, and this is an argument of the Germans. You know that this year NATO will issue its new strategic concept. There's an obsession with keeping consensus within the alliance, and this is, of course, clearly endangered by not only the Greek-Turkey's difficulties, but the France-Turkey competition. So one question is the consensus within the EU, within the NATO, bravo. And the second issue is the place of the EU. Where does the strategic autonomy play inside NATO, of course? And the last difficulty with NATO is what's the US position going to be? It is seen now as a very transactional. You saw that only very recently, the State Department made it clear that they would not support the EastMed gas pipeline project, saying that its feasibility was not clear, but it's been perceived also as a political attempt to balance the relationship with Turkey. And the last difficulty on the way is, what do we do with Cyprus? To our, I would say, partly to our surprise, when we did these inquiries, interviews, etc., when we went to both to Athens and Nicosia, we had difficulty to make sense of the relationship between Greece and Cyprus. And we saw that the Cypriots were in some way interested in making strategic approaches to tighten the links with France. But the French are quite, I would say, they're quite reluctant, in the sense that they feel the Cyprus file is disturbing the EU consensus potentially also. And this is not something that we need now at the beginning of the French presidency of the EU. So it's not necessarily easy to connect the Cyprus file with the Greek file, but the problem is that it's clearly, there's clearly now an alert on Cyprus. It's clearly a red point. It's the number one point that we should worry about in the East Med probably by now. And I stop there and leave the floor to Thanos now, who will give us the symmetric viewpoint.
Thank you, Dorothee. Thanos, we are listening to you.
Thank you, and I would like to thank the Ifri for the opportunity to meet a number of good friends. COVID has not provided us many opportunities to meet physically, but at least Zoom is a substitute, a poor one, but at least a substitute. Let me say the usual proviso, the views expressed will be mine, not necessarily those of the Greek government. And I will most likely speak as a think tanker anyway, which I have been for most of my professional life. To answer your question about a new partnership, I would slightly disagree with the term new partnership, because to add a historical perspective into our discussion, France and Greece have been on the same side for the past few centuries. And we do, Greece is grateful to France for its contribution to the War of Greek independence. And we had our bicentenary last year. And we have been on the same side in all major conflicts in the past 2 centuries. You know, 2 world wars, the Cold War. Both France and Greece are countries deeply committed to European integration. We share the same vision. And when it comes, so I think it's a permanent partnership between our 2 countries, which gets to be upgraded every now and then for a number of reasons. And it seems to me that in this particular period, there are 2 basic strategic premises that explain the close relationship between France and Greece. One is, as Dorothea mentioned, the concept of European strategic autonomy. And we're both committed to this concept for a number of reasons. I will mention them in a minute. And the second is the need to stabilize Europe's neighborhood in the south from all kinds of problems and malign influences. So of course, Turkey is part of the image of the problem, but it seems to me, at least from a Greek perspective, but I suspect from a French perspective as well, it's a tactical matter. It's not the strategic imperative behind this rapprochement, this cooperation. So first of all, European strategic autonomy, for a number of reasons, you know, the Trump administration's isolationist tendencies and America first approach, then the US pivot to Asia, which has been implemented by successive US administrations over the past at least 15 years, if not more, and is expected to continue. Also, the sudden, the very hurried US withdrawal from Afghanistan, you know, has strengthened the impression in a number of European countries, but also European institutions, that Europe needs its own capabilities in a complementary manner, and that those capabilities are not mutually exclusive with a strong NATO. So I think both Greece and France share that position, that you can have a strong NATO, and we are deeply committed to that, but also gradually develop a European defense capability. Secondly, stabilizing the southern neighborhood. And it has been a very troubled neighborhood for many years. It has almost been a perfect storm in the last 10 years for, you know, a combination of existing long-term conflicts, then the impact of the Arab revolts, the relative withdrawal of the US from the region, the weakening of the EU as a result of its of the multi-crisis it has been going through over the past few years, the rise or return of powers like Russia in the Mediterranean, the emergence of China, also the role of ambitious regional powers, which do include Turkey, Iran, the Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, and others. Plus functional issues like population movements, terrorism, climate change. These have deeply affected in a negative way stability in the Mediterranean and have affected European interest and security. And Europe has been faced with problems like population movements and terrorist attacks in various European countries. and at the same time, it has very limited influence in its southern neighborhood. Now, this cannot continue, obviously, for too long. Europe needs to tackle those problems. And on top of everything else, there's also no regional security architecture in the Mediterranean. Now, brief reference has been made to the Union for the Mediterranean. Well, if we set the standards too low, then its continuing existence is a success story. But I was kind of hoping that we would aim higher. I'm one of the people that believed in the Barcelona process. It's a pity it failed. But I think we should aim higher when it comes to the regional security architecture. We had, over the past 10 years, those trilateral partnerships, which have acted as a substitute, however limited, for regional security architecture. Now, I can hear Sinan thinking, and I think he will say that in his intervention, that they were designed to isolate Turkey. I would probably reverse the argument, saying that Turkey did its best to isolate itself, having problems of a different nature with all the key players in the Eastern Med, Israel, Egypt, Greece, and Cyprus. But let me deal less with the past and take a leap forward and say that, yes, those partnerships and additional ones have been created with the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. And I think they need to be expanded and deepened. Probably they were based initially at a common threat perception. It seems to me that we have gone well beyond that stage, and now the basis for cooperation are common interests between these countries and the need to stabilize the region. I think it's about time to expand and deepen those relationships, also expand them geographically all the way to the Indian Ocean, to include India, which is a major power. Those partnerships should be open-ended, inclusive, not exclusive. Of course, there is one basic precondition that any country interested in participating should accept the rules of the game, or rather, one basic rule: peaceful settlement of disputes, no use of force, no threats of use of force. And I think there's, and of course the US is in its own special way part of this process with a 3+1 in the Eastern Med. I think there is good potential for those countries. And France, of course, being the only European country, the only EU member states with both a power projection capability, but also the political will to take a leading role in the Eastern Med and also in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Sahel, to both project European influence, but also protect European interests and security. This is the strategic picture at this stage. Greece is fully committed into that process. Dorothea mentioned the participation of Greek forces in the Takuba operation. And of course, there are all kinds of ideas being discussed at the operational level between the Greek and French defense staffs and foreign and defense ministries. Let me emphasize, and this will be my closing point for the first part of our discussion, going back to the European strategic autonomy, that there are a number of steps that could easily be taken, like consolidation of European defense industry, a permanent European naval presence in regions of key importance like the Mediterranean, the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Also the completion of the strategic compass in a way that will be compatible with NATO strategic concept, which will also be discussed in 2020 and decided upon in 2022. Also European reaction forces. I think there are a number of steps that the EU can and should take to promote its security. And France and Greece are two of the countries, but hopefully not the only ones, that will be investing in 2022 in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thanos. That will create some reaction maybe from Sinan Ülgen. We would like to hear your point of view.
You will definitely get some reaction from me, and I'll perhaps be a bit, provocative, if I may, having heard some of the very valuable comments by Dorothee and Thanos. Let me start with the overall framework, and then I'll go to the bilateral relationship. But the overall framework has to do about European security. And if it is indeed true that this France-Greece agreement is being branded and marketed, as Dorothee has mentioned, if I understood that correctly, as one clear sign of where European strategic autonomy is heading, let me tell you, this is a very wrong track. It is a very wrong track because it is signaling that European strategic autonomy is going to be built and strengthened to the detriment of Turkey. And I don't think you want to do that. I don't think that that's the right message to Turkey, and that's not the right message with regard to the future of European security. That's not the right message in how to, and here I would very much second what Thanos has said, how to strengthen the NATO-EU relationship. We are indeed at a critical time this year in terms of the future of European security, with both the strategic compass that will be launched on the EU side and the NATO strategic concept that will be finalized towards June 2022. So in a way, we should do the exact opposite in the sense of trying to give confidence that these two entities can work together, which would entail the principle that European strategic autonomy should not be viewed and built to the detriment of the security of another European state. Unfortunately, this is how the France, I mean, that may be the term, but this is how the France-Greece partnership has been viewed in Turkey. And I heard this being seconded, in at least the interpretation of it, how it's being branded is exactly that way. So I think this is, we have started, if this is indeed, the path forward for how Europe conceives how it intends to build up its strategic autonomy, that's going to be a very divisive and not necessarily a productive strategy going forward. So I think that perspective of how the France-Greece agreement fits in the debate on European strategic autonomy, I think needs to be revisited. And if the EU really wants this initiative towards strengthening its own strategic autonomy, which I must say, in principle, Turkey supports it, because Turkey views itself as a European state, regardless of whether it's a member of the EU. And it wants, many aspects of European security to be, espoused and to be addressable by European states. We also say similar concerns with regard to the long-term commitment of the Americans to the security of Europe. But nonetheless, the difference is that since the very early years of the development of what was then called European security and defense identity, or European security and defense policy, and here I'm talking to the Saint-Malo Agreement and the developments that followed, Turkey wanted to be associated with the security pillar of the EU. That was the case in its earlier incarnation in the form of the Western European Union. And Turkey wanted to develop similar relations, knowing full well that it was not a EU member state at the time, but nonetheless, it is a European state. And it has a vested interest in the security of Europe and in the security of the European neighborhood. And not only that, Turkey is one of the more capable states. And we have seen this for good reason, sometimes for bad reason, when Turkey has projected, it's one of the few entities, few states that is able to do that across a number of different geographies. So Turkey has that capability too. So it has a lot to bring to efforts to enhance European security. And from that perspective, I want to perhaps close the first part of my argument here. Rightly or wrongly, but the perception is there, that if the EU and especially France is intent on strengthening this pillar of European strategic identity to the detriment of Turkey, we are looking at a rather, a crisis-prone future in our own relationship, particularly with France, and what this European strategic autonomy will entail. And I don't think that that's the exact future that we want. I think we should all be looking to how we could strengthen the European pillar, but also how we can make it in a way more inclusive. Now, let me switch now more to bilateral issues about how this agreement has been viewed. And here I would have, two criticisms and one comment perhaps on the future of the Turkey-France relationship. The criticism is that it is clear that Turkey and Greece have a number of outstanding disputes. These disputes have to be resolved through peaceful means. There has been in the past, and there's now a revitalization of the bilateral talks between Turkey and Greece. Thanos can correct me, but I think we're at the 63rd or 62nd round of these talks since they've started. So there's a lot to talk about between Turkey and Greece. The France-Greece agreement has come at a time when, despite these bilateral engagement between Turkey and Greece in order to resolve these disputes, and I tend to think that some of these disputes will be resolved politically, some of them, the two sides will end up agreeing to take them to international arbitration or international court. I don't see any other way to, overall to resolve these disputes. But what France has done has been very inimical to the prospect of the settlement of bilateral disputes between Turkey and Greece. Because in essence, it has solidified and strengthened the maximalist viewpoints, firstly on Greece, and as a reaction to that in Turkey, I would argue. Because by giving this unconditional support to Greece in its bilateral disputes with Turkey, France is essentially saying, I'm not interested in a fair settlement of this dispute. I am fully behind the official position of the government in Athens. And therefore, this is the reason why it has been viewed very negatively in Turkey. So that would be my first criticism. My second criticism is that by the nature of this agreement, it raises the prospect of militarizing the dispute, and this is certainly not what we want, because it will be viewed again in Turkey as Greece getting the military support of France in a potential scenario. And the maximalist camp in Turkey will view that, aha, you see, the reason why we have been, more using hard power in this is exactly now being legitimized, because this is what is happening on the other side as well. So the only solution here is to continue to invest in hard power and at the same time as the diplomatic negotiations. So I think the prospect of securitizing these bilateral disputes is also inimical. I want to, in terms of the Turkey-France bilateral relationship as well, this is a bad signal, because now the Turkish policymakers will view France as being unconditionally behind the position of Greece. And as a result, Turkish policymakers will reassess their position of France as a potential strategic partner in Turkey, especially with regard to cooperation in defense industries. Turkey already has, a major stumbling block that has become an issue with at the bilateral level with the United States following the purchase of the S-400. But up until the agreement with, between Paris and Athens, one option has always been, which I had, also personally very much supported, the European option for Turkey's air and defense needs. And that was the SAMP-T system, the Italian-French consortium. But now, under these circumstances, with France being viewed with such suspicion as a result of with this agreement, it's also very debatable if this European option would actually be supported and fully taken into consideration by Turkish policymakers. So in that sense, that's also to the detriment of European security, because you don't want these type of difficulties between a NATO ally and the EU states. So these are all some of the points that was raised in the discussions in Turkey with regard to this agreement. That's where I want to end.
Thank you, Sinan. That was clear. And the question goes now to Zenonas Tsiaras. We have heard Sinan defending the point of view of Turkey. And the question is very simple. You, as a Cypriot, do you see this new French, Greek axis as a rampart against what you consider as an aggression in the eastern part of the Mediterranean? Or do you see that in a wider scale, in a regional scale, as a way to reorganize European autonomy, strategic autonomy?
Well, yes, thank you very much for the invitation to Ifri, and it's very good to see everyone here. Well, obviously, as it often happens when you speak last, the previous comments derailed my thought entirely. So I will come up with something else on the spot. But your question, Christian, is very valid and obviously a very topical one. But let me just point out a few things that were mentioned before, just before delving into this, because I think that the geopolitical or the systemic context and the timeline of events over if we take things, let's say macro historically, if we can say that, over the past, say, 20 years, perhaps some things will become clearer, because since the middle of the 2000s, we've had an international power transition, as I think both Dorothee and Thanos mentioned. And in the context of this transition, we've had significant power vacuums emerging in the broader Middle East and Mediterranean. Now, these power vacuums, as was natural, and as happens in physics and natural sciences, usually had to be filled by someone. And there were many aspiring states who tried to fill this vacuums, including smaller states. But obviously primacy was given de facto to bigger states, like, for example, Turkey, Iran, first in Iraq, for example, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and so on. But in the context of these transitions, what we saw, I think, a definitive sort of change and development in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East was how Turkish foreign policy became more assertive in conjunction to domestic developments as well. We had the consolidation of the Justice and Development Party, the AKP, and this sort of brought a new vision in the first decade, the first couple of terms of the AKP. We saw a very constructive diplomacy, economic initiatives, soft power being projected, and so on. And this was all good. But starting from the, let's say, the end of the decade and the beginning of the 2010s, we saw a domestic transition that was becoming increasingly more authoritarian, and this was expressed in foreign policy as well. I mean, you can see, and it's pretty obvious, that the regional security architecture and the regional balances of power sort of changed because of how Turkish foreign policy resulted or produced this breakdown in relations such as the one between Turkey and Israel first, and then between Turkey and Egypt. Obviously, this was capitalized, as one should have expected, by Cyprus as well as Greece, as they thought that this could help them counterbalance Turkish foreign policy, which by the middle of the 2010s, it seemed quite assertive. And after 2016, the failed coup attempt became gradually offensive and aggressive. And we saw that happening in Syria, we saw that happening in Iraq, we saw that happening in Libya to a certain extent, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in many other places. So I am mentioning this because these trilateral partnerships, which are not alliances, they're just, sort of, to a certain extent, even low-level cooperation agreements on issues like economy, tourism, trade, and energy only on the cards. It's like only on the paper, doesn't really translate often. We've seen that the East Med is not so much a pipe as much as a pipe dream, but this came as a response to all these changes that Turkish foreign policy produced in the region. And it came, as Stanos mentioned, at least at the beginning, they were created on the basis of a common security threat perception, and to a certain extent as well on the prospect of energy cooperation, because by that time we had the discoveries of natural gas of Israel, of Cyprus, and obviously Egypt, which was a game changer in 2015, the Zohr reserve. In that context, in the years that followed, say from 2015 until the end of the decade, we had the more active involvement of other actors, because all these changes in the East Med sort of fell within a broader geopolitical framework of competition, which I said before happened partly because of the international changes in the power vacuums. So this power competition involved many other countries in the area, and was exacerbated by the changes that came about with the Arab uprisings. So we had different axes antagonizing each other. I mean, we had Turkey on the one hand and Qatar, for example, and then we had, on the other hand, we had the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. Egypt was playing a role. We saw this antagonism being expressed within countries like Syria, Iraq, and Libya, and so on. So as the trilateral partnerships were becoming part of this broader antagonism, having obviously, though other purposes as well, as Stanos mentioned, other countries, extra-regional powers came to support these networks. France was one of them, the United Arab Emirates later was another one, and so on. In 2017, Cyprus and France signed an agreement on defense cooperation that was not, however, an alliance agreement such as the one signed between Greece and France. This agreement came into force in 2020. And at the same time, in 2019, Cyprus and France signed an agreement allowing the French Navy to use the Evangelos Florakis naval base in Limassol. These are accommodations that Cyprus gives to many countries. It's not just France. I mean, Germany, Russia, and so on. But obviously, the case of Cyprus is very much different from the case of Greece, because Greece is certainly is a bigger country, is a more powerful country militarily. It's actually a leading country in terms of power in the region, especially in the Balkans and the Eastern Mediterranean. It has a very strong navy. So this presents a much better and capable partner, be that for France or anyone else that wants to have a foothold or increase their influence or secure their interests in the broader area. Cyprus, though a democratic EU member state, and so on, it's still a small state. It has a major political issue, the Cyprus problem. It has a small military capability, virtually no navy at all, virtually no air force at all. So it's not really the best and most capable partner, and a partner that could be relied upon from the perspective of capabilities, not the politics. And so, from my perspective, I could understand why France would not proceed to sign the same agreement with Cyprus as well, because what France would get back would probably be less than what France could offer. At the same time, giving you the Cypriot perspective here is that in Nicosia there is some disappointment, because they see this French-Greek alliance deepening, expanding in a way that we haven't seen in decades. I mean, alliance agreements are not frequent in today's international system. And it was a very major development, one that Cyprus has been wanting from other states in the region for years, like Israel and Egypt. Obviously, these countries wouldn't do it for their own reasons as well, one of them being that they want to keep open prospects and channels, the possibility, in other words, for reconciliation or normalization of ties with Turkey. But there is some disappointment that this relationship with France is mostly words than actions. And that would be my counter argument to the Turkish narrative as well. Turkey always likes to present itself like the victim, like the one excluded, like the one, being threatened, and so on. But as a matter of fact, the timeline of events proves otherwise. That is the first thing, because the first threat came from Turkey, and other states sort of tried to counterbalance that threat, which then later, obviously, Turkey interpreted as a threat to itself. And the second one is that these partnerships haven't really done anything against Turkey. I mean, you can see that Turkey has used the East Med pipeline to say that, these countries are trying to exclude Turkey from the region, although we knew, years ago, that the East Med would not really happen. And Turkey knew that as well. But Turkey used that as a political tool to rally support around its own geopolitical agenda. And the notion that France cannot support or cannot have a deal with Greece because this means that it's standing firm by the Greek position, I don't think that's a valid argument, because this would mean that Turkey cannot have deals itself with other countries, because these countries somehow support the stance of Turkey, and therefore their relations with Turkey are mutually exclusive with those with Greece. But even despite that things are like that, Turkey has had multiple deals with multiple countries, and not least in the defense sector, selling drones and other defense equipment. We have Niger, we had Kazakhstan, we had Ukraine, we had, you know, Albania. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I think I talk too much, so I will leave it at that. And I'm open to answers if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zenonas. Sinan Ülgen, a quick, please, answer, maybe?
Very quick. I did not say, as Zenonas implied, that France cannot have this deal with Greece. It had it. I'm talking about the consequences of that deal. So it's not that, you know, firstly. Secondly, there is no similar agreement that Turkey has with any other state, unlike the France-Greece agreement, which has been interpreted in Turkey as a, you know, as a direct agreement that targets Turkey. So in that sense, my analysis of how this would impact the Turkey-Greece bilateral issues remains valid. And all those examples of Turkey having defense deal with other countries, you know, they're irrelevant in this case, because they're not, there is no, it's not the same basis. Here we're talking about security guarantees. It's very different than, you know, purely, you know, defense deals on commercial basis. So I don't think that the comparison is relevant.
Okay, Thanos Dakos, a commentary, a brief commentary.
Well, I would say I would agree with Zenon that the chronological sequence of events is always very important. Who reacted to whom, who initiated action. And if one looks from a Greek perspective, of course, you have the Turkish-Libyan, I call it legal monstrosity, the delimitation memorandum, the Mavi Vatan, the instrumentalization of migration flows. So it's not surprising that Greece reacted in a defensive manner. I forgot to mention energy in my comments. Of course, energy discoveries in the Eastern Med is an important development, small by European standards so far, but quite important for the countries involved. It was hoped that they would act as catalysts for peace. Unfortunately, the impact was exactly the opposite. There was even more disagreement and conflict as a result of those discoveries. But then on the issue, one can understand the Turkey's reaction, and Turkey being unhappy about the French-Greek partnership. But let me also say here that perceptions are always at the eye of the beholder. And they're not always objective. But I would say it's a defensive partnership. One, it's not be concerned unless one has you know, different plans in his mind about, you know, revisionist actions. If not, there's nothing to be worried about from this cooperation between France and Greece.
Thank you, Thanos. I would like to go back to Dorothee. Dorothee, Sinan Ülgen has used many times the word inamical, and also another word, many times too. This Franco-Greek alliance could be built, that's the hypothesis of Mr. Ülgen, to the detriment of Turkey. Is that something real from your point of view?
So what I get from all interventions is everyone is really completely embodying the sort of the caricature of what the states say. Like France is all about, you know, the EU building European autonomy and consolidating the EU. Greece is about not offending anyone, but being realistic about the new strategic situation in the region. And Cyprus is going even more strategic than Greece, insisting on their weaknesses. And the Turks feel threatened by the ones who say they want only to defend themselves from Turkey. So that's one of the constant fascinating feature, is that the Turkish vision of the region is that they don't see themselves apparently as a power. And we do see them. I completely agree with the Zenonas observation that what made the difference, what just triggered this frenzy of agreements, of maritime delimitation agreements, defense agreements, etc., is Turkey's rising profile in the region. I don't know if the Turks can understand how we saw the critical mass, their critical mass, rising and becoming the one most important factor, disturbing, let's say, the status quo in the region. And this discussion about status quo is very important, because it was like the expression that came the more often in every discussion with the Germans, the Greeks, the Cypriots, etc. Do we have a status quo in the region? The Germans want to defend the status quo. NATO wants to defend the consensus and the status quo, but there is no status quo anymore. When you read about, or when you listen to Emmanuel Macron's discourses, recent discourses, speeches on the Mediterranean, it all starts with a statement on all of the differences we see that are building at a very, very fast speed in the Mediterranean for the last 2-3 years. We cannot see the region as we did see it 10 years ago. It is unrealistic to try and keep the balance as they were, because they do not exist anymore. So that's one point. The other point is that Thanos said it's a defensive agreement. From the French perspective, I would say this is perceived as deterrence. This has been framed as a deterrence agreement. The Turks see it as aggressive, but we see it as a deterrence agreement. This is meant to keep the front line not in combat. This is meant to do not a cordon sanitaire, but to try and calm down the energies on both sides. What is very clear is that at no point we discuss the possibility of going to open conflict with Turkey. This has never been addressed, and I don't think it's even been considered. I don't think it's an option. But this is something we can discuss between ourselves, because this is of course the most difficult point. Do we really consider that Turkish presence in the Aegean, in what the Greeks say are their sovereign waters, is a casus belli? That's the most difficult point. The problem is that when we have this millefeuille, this multiplication of agreements, especially I see it very, very striking that the Greeks are doing these mutual defense agreements with, even like with the UAE, with a country that's outside of the immediate subsystem, Eastern Med subsystem. Of course, the sensitivity of the issue is rising, and the possibility of an incident is becoming more present. So this is the problem we have with the arms race in the Mediterranean. This is the problem we have with the multiplication of defense agreement, even if they're only defensive. This is also why Cyprus is such a fascinating story to follow, because all the tensions do converge on Cyprus. But in the end, life proceeds, circulation goes on, refugees migrate, trades going on. Up to a certain point, things keep on working until there is a military incident. And don't forget, we went very close to a military incident with Turkey off the coast of Libya. This is why we think we need deterrence, because if you read, we did a very, to me, fascinating paper. And I know Aris Margelis, who wrote the paper, is now attending this seminar. We did something on how the French military perceive the Turkish military. And in a nutshell, what they say is, we like to work with the Turks because they're extremely reliable, professional, etc. We see a multiplication of incidents. And it did not start in 2020. We've seen for the last, not only 5 years, not only since 2016 in the aftermath of the failed coup attempt in Turkey, but we've seen for, let's say, a decade, incidents when we do cooperate, when we do work in joint operations, or when we do only meet with the Turkish military in different arenas. And this is worrying to us.
Okay, clear. Anyone wants to add a comment on what Dorothy said? Especially maybe Sinan?
Actually, I'll answer some of that because we're going to have the Q&A session. So I think I'll have enough time to answer some of these issues. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you. Okay, Sinan. Well, I think it's time to listen to the questions coming from the audience. Elisa, are you with us?
Yes, yes, I am. Thank you, Christian.
So you're welcome. What do you say? We have 4 or 5 questions.
We have 4 questions, and I'd like to invite the participant to ask their question in the Q&A chats. Not the proper chat, but the Q&A chats. So we can just read now we have 5 questions. So the first one is, supporting EU strategic sovereignty entails supporting the EU's defense on the territorial integrity of its member states. This includes the Republic of Cyprus, whose government and sovereignty Turkey continues to refuse to recognize. How is that compatible with the statement that Turkey supports EU strategic autonomy? Maybe this question is for Sinan, I guess. Would you like that I read all the 6 questions now? Or Sinan, maybe you want to answer the first one?
No confusion. I think one question is enough, especially this one, which is very controversial. Maybe Sinan, you can answer.
Yeah. Well, the concept of European strategic autonomy is, obviously of a, different strategic issue than, Turkey's bilateral relations with some of the EU member states, including Cyprus. In principle, because this is about the future of European security. There it's about how EU and NATO will collaborate, how the future steps of EU strategic autonomy will be devised and implemented. And from the Turkish perspective, Turkey wants this to be an inclusive process. Where it would also have a role, given that just like the UK, by also that it's not about the security of the EU; it should be about the security of Europe. And if there is going to be in the years to come a more fair burden sharing between the US and European countries, this should be reflected in the future strategic discussions between European countries and the United States. And one vehicle would be this platform that will continue under the name, or that will be fostered under the name of European strategic autonomy. The issue with Cyprus is totally different in the sense that Turkey supports their UN-sponsored process. Let us recall, and I think it is, we need to do that on occasion, that it was the Greek Cypriots that refused a settlement that would have solved the issue in 2004, when the Annan plan was put to a referendum. It wasn't Turks. The Turkish Cypriots said yes. The Turkish government supported it. The Greek Cypriots refused it. So I think we need to remind ourselves that you cannot blame Turkey for the non-resolution of the Cyprus settlement. And there are indeed ongoing talks, and let's just hope that these ongoing talks will deliver, and that we will finally reach a state where the political settlement is indeed reached. But these are two very different issues, and I don't think that there's any incompatibility with Turkey in principle supporting European strategic autonomy, given its strategic importance for the future of European security and its position on Cyprus, which is where it supports UN-sponsored talks for the settlement of this dispute.
Ladies and gentlemen, anyone would like to add something on Sinan's comment?
Can I?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, well, Turkey doesn't really support a UN-sponsored solution in Cyprus, because ever since 2017, Turkey officially declared through the mouth of both Çavuşoğlu and Erdogan that they will no longer be discussing within the UN parameters, and that's an official statement. And ever since, they went on to make a shift towards supporting officially a two-state solution, which is not within the UN parameters and is not the UN-sponsored solution on Cyprus. Moreover, I mean, I get the 2004 argument, which is recurring, and it's the foundation of the Turkish narrative, but you cannot really penalize in diplomacy, public opinion, the outcome of the ballot. And Greek Cypriots in 2004 did not reject the solution of the problem altogether. They rejected that specific plan. Public opinion polls since then have showed that Greek Cypriots, as well as Turkish Cypriots, support a bizonal, bicommunal federation, and that's in both communities the second option. Turkish Cypriots have as a first option the separation, obviously, and Greek Cypriots the unitary state. But bizonal, bicommunal federation is where both communities agree as the second option. And the third point is that in terms of strategic autonomy, I mean, Turkey has traditionally been supporting the NATO approach to European security strategy. Obviously, security strategy. But in recent years, this has changed for a number of reasons, both international, European, and regional. But how can the EU rely on Turkey, although many EU member states are invested in various ways on Turkey, both economically, financially, militarily, security-wise, energy-wise, or whatever, and we understand that, and that's a given. But how can the EU as a union rely on Turkey, which is a capable country, as Sinan explained before, for its security and its strategy, if Turkey does not abide by basic, criteria of the EU? And forget about Cyprus. Let's talk about domestically what happens. The corruption, the authoritarianism, the democratic deficit, the financial policies, all the witch hunt, the revisionist policies in Syria, and so on. I mean, the refugee issue, which Erdogan has used openly as a threat and a bargaining chip with the EU. I mean, yes, Turkey could be a great partner for the EU. Turkey could be a capable tool in the EU strategy, but can really the EU rely on this Turkey?
I'm sorry, I need to react to this. This is becoming a bit of a Turkey bashing session. and I don't think it is the objective of this session. I fully disagree with the statements by Zenonas. You have other countries in the EU that are not particular poster childs of democracy and the rule of law. They are, very well included in this debate on European strategic autonomy. I don't represent the government. I have been critical of some of these policies in my own country. But in terms of the debate on security, the failures of Turkish democracy today cannot be portrayed the way that you have done in terms of as an argument to exclude Turkey from European security. You cannot have European security to the detriment of Turkey. That to me is clear. So regardless of what happens in Turkey, and we all hope that Turkey will have reform. There will be, a new Turkey with, espousing, the rule of law and human rights. But regardless of that, Europe needs Turkey as a partner in its own security. You cannot have European security in its own neighborhood when you're trying to build up your own strategic concept to the detriment of Turkey. And I think this understanding that, arguing that today the lack of democratic reform in Turkey is provides the foundation for excluding Turkey from European strategic initiative is a very dangerous one.
Yeah, just one note.
And also on Cyprus, it's not only about 2004, it's also about 2017. What happened in Crans-Montana? It was Anastasopoulos that refused to uphold the agreement. He didn't take the political initiative when Turkey went ahead and even discussed the lifting of security and military presence there. So let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. I won't get into debate.
Just one word.
Please. I will not get into debate. I get the positions. My comments were not against Sinan. I was just commenting on the Turkish narrative, as I said. That's why I mentioned it specifically. And I never said that the EU should exclude Turkey. And I agree that Turkey is important for the European security. But that's why I mentioned that there is a trust problem there. Because when a country, threatens the EU with, for example, refugee flows, then it becomes a problem in discussing with that country and negotiating their common security. That's it.
That's it. Please don't make the work of the moderator more complicated than it is. Please, we go back to the question, Elisa.
Yes, sure. Maybe we can move on to to other protagonists, such as Italy and Spain. Maybe Thanos, you can answer to this question. What are their perspectives about this new agreement between Greece and France, and also what is the position of the United States and the new Biden administration toward this Franco-Greek agreement?
That's interesting, yes, the position of Biden's administration. Thanos, we are listening to you.
Unfortunately, I cannot speak for Italy and Spain. They have their own interest in the Mediterranean, and they have their own agendas. Not as dynamic as the French one, not as active as the French one. They do have a good relationship with Turkey for a number of reasons, which I understand they would like to maintain. But I think this is no different with the case of France or Greece. We both would like to develop a good relationship with Turkey. This would be in the interest of all sides involved. But whether they're happy with the French-Greek partnership, I really don't know. As for the Biden administration, well, their reaction was quite muted. Perhaps there was an element of guilt because of AUKUS. But my understanding is also that they do welcome any European initiative in the Eastern Med, because their presence keeps declining. And I don't think that's a trend that will be reversed in the future. So anything that their partners are willing to do to stabilize this region, I think, is in principle welcomed in Washington. But if I may add one point about Turkey's importance, and Sinan knows that I don't disagree with this. Turkey is an important trade partner for the EU. It has a significant role to play in migration management, and Greece has repeatedly sent that message, which was unfortunately not understood or well received in Ankara, and this is unfortunate. And also Turkey is obviously an important partner for the EU in terms of security. Problem is, in the eyes of many Europeans, is not Europe's strategic autonomy that's the problem. It's Turkey's own strategic autonomy and the fact that it has moved in what many NATO countries perceived as dangerously close to Russia. That has been the problem over the past few years. And this has caused confusion, suspicion, and this is something that needs to be discussed in the context of NATO, but also in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisa, another question.
We have a question for Sinan. He talked about the threatening of the maximalist camp in Turkey due to the Greek-French alliance. Are there really competing positions in the East Med in Turkey, and who in the Turkish political spectrum is defending a non-maximalist demand?
Clear question.
Yes, there are different viewpoints in Turkey about the East Med position, not so much in terms of the core of the argument, namely, there are no major differences in terms of how Turkey views its own legitimate rights, but there are differences, very clear differences, in how these rights can be advanced, both at the rhetorical level and at the diplomatic level. In other words, the narrative of the Mavi Vatan people is to portray these, or Turkey's claims, let's say, as Turkey's rights. The other school of thought say that there are contested areas in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we should settle. There's obviously different viewpoints, and we should settle these through diplomatic means. That's the core difference, internally in Turkey about how different political actors look at the East Med.
Okay, another question, Elisa. We have many questions to answer.
Yes, we do. And the other one is about another important issue which is energy. Maybe Dorothée, you can answer to this question. Is it possible that current rise in energy prices creating turmoil in Turkey relaunch the maritime oil and gas exploration in Mediterranean, as Turkey would like to seek for of an energetical autonomy, and consequently re-increase tension between Turkey and Greece and other like France?
So it's true we didn't expand too much on these energy matters. I think only Thanos mentioned that everyone hoped this would be the gas discoveries would make an environment that was sort of enticing for multilateral peace discussions, etc. And it's not the case. We know the energy dependency on Russia is driving part of the Turkish external policy, even if it's implicitly. There is a race for diversification of sources, of resources. And my problem is always in any discussion with the Greeks, especially, to try and decide whether the feud over energy resources is really the one important, or at least one of the very important parameters in this East-Med difficulties, of it's a pretext, because normally the Greeks would argue that Turkey is using energy as a pretext. It's purely national expansionism, etc. I do think energy matters, my point, but then maybe Sinan could enlighten us a little bit more on that. My point is that the Turks have been trying to freeze the situation, to make it impossible for all actors to exploit the resources without them, behind their back in some way. But now the Turks have an alternative, because they're starting to find resources in the Black Sea, which do give some oxygen to them. We know that they're now getting closer to the, there's a great maneuver to getting closer to the Gulf states, reconciliation with the UAE, and now approaches towards Saudi Arabia. So this is all going into the same direction of trying to secure Turkish economic perspective through the energy, securing of energy resources outside. So I don't think this is now playing as heavily as it was in the past on the East-Med, because now only Egypt is able actually to exploit the resources in the East-Med so far. We know the rest is terribly entangled, very complicated to settle for the time being. The problem is on the diplomatic side. It's political, it's not economic. And the Turks are looking elsewhere, I think. So I don't think it's now the major driver for the attitude of the Turks on the East-Med. There was another question in the chat that I'd be very embarrassed to answer, which is how do the French see Athens' recent claim that they will expand their territorial waters around the Aegean islands? And I don't think the French are really factoring this in. They've just read the success of the agreement with the Greeks as, I say, one symbolic pillar in the building of the strategic autonomy, bringing the Greeks to Sahel, and now hoping that this whole de-escalation mood that we have in the East-Med will prevail, and that the bilateral negotiation will work between the Greek and the Turks. So it is part of the game that each side, the Turks and the Greeks, do express their claims, even in a maximalist way, because it's part of the bargaining, I'd say.
Okay, next question, Elisa.
Yes, we have 2 minutes left.
Unless Sinan would like to add something on,
sure,
on what Dorothee previously said.
Very briefly, I think, Dorothee, the Turkish perspective on energy in East-Med is, one, Turkey finds itself essentially in a geographically advantageous position, because many of the projects, if they're not linked through Turkey, are going to be more expensive to ship. And Turkey obviously wants to leverage and has leveraged this strategic position that comes from geography. Secondly, it's not only about energy, it's about sovereignty. So many of the issues that we see in the East-Med, energy exploration, is not so much about how we can profit or prevent others from profiting from these resources. It's mostly about basically following the line regarding claims, whether particularly connected to the EEZ and the continental shelf, regardless of whether there's any energy deposits there.
Okay, thank you. Elisa?
We have actually 1 minute left, so if anyone wants to have a last word to conclude, or would you prefer to take one last question? We have a question about the S-400 issue, and a question about the reaction of of EU states but not member of NATO, such as Finland and Sweden.
That's for Dorothee, I think.
You're mute, Dorothee.
I'm very ignorant about Finland and Sweden's position vis-à-vis the France-Greek relation, but there's a fascinating question for Sinan, a very short one. When and how the S-400 issue will be resolved?
It will be resolved with a new government in Turkey, with a formula that has already been, aired, which is that Turkey keeps possession of this, system, but conditions its use to very stringent rules in agreement with the United States. I think that's the formula that will eventually help to resolve the issue.
Okay, Dorothée?
No, Christian, if you want to wrap up, I think we're okay in terms of timing and things.
New questions, Elisa? No?
Yes? Yes, I think we are quite done actually.
We have no questions.
You can wrap up. You can wrap up.
Can I make a very quick comment,
yes,
please?
Of course.
Inaccurate reporting by the media on both sides has been an old problem in Greek-Turkish relations. Now, if you read the statement by the foreign minister, there is absolutely no reference to the expansion of territorial waters. He speaks about the Ionian Sea, which has nothing to do with Turkey. It was an agreement between Greece and Italy. So there's no reference to expansion of territorial waters. And then if I may, one sentence, as Dorothée mentioned, the French-Greek agreement, the intention is to prevent unilateral moves and the militarization of the situation. Now, if there is no intention to do either, then this is a very innocent partnership between two countries which should not annoy or affect any third country.
Sinan, are you reassured?
Well, I mean, I've made my, I went through the list of my arguments in the way why I think this agreement is inimical, not because Turkey will be put on the defensive as a whole, but the implications in terms of how Turkey cooperates with the EU, the future of NATO-EU, and basically how Turkey sees itself as a partner for European security on all those grounds. And my final argument was that regardless of the scenarios that it may trigger, my fear is that this is going to make the bilateral negotiations more difficult because of an ingérence by a third party.
Dorothée, I think we come now to the conclusion of this debate. What is the feeling you draw from this discussion? My personal feeling is that, well, all the lines are clear. I think that what was very constructive in this debate is that we have heard everyone's position clearly and everyone's sensitivity on a very sensitive question. I think that the sensible part of this question of the French-Greek relationship has been maybe a little bit underestimated, and that all these cannot be solved only by diplomacy, but also by personal contact coming from the head of states. If there is something clear between France and Greece, which is called true friendship, it's interesting, there is still something to build with Turkey. And that has not only to do with Mr. Macron's personal position, but also with the Turkish president's personal attitude. That was just a comment I wanted to ask, but I go back to you, Dorothée. What is your conclusion?
If I just step on this new platform that you're proposing, Christian, I think the France friendship with Turkey is very deep, historically documented, but it's very complicated. But what we know is that currently, beyond the rhetoric, there are lots of sectors where both governments do interact in a very productive way. At the state level, it works a lot. There are political incidents. And now, you know, we're entering a presidential, we'll have a presidential election in France. So we are entering the presidential campaign, where of course, everyone who's working on Turkey in France would fear that Turkey would be on the agenda. This is why I'm just trying to persuade my Turkish partners that we do not necessarily need to discuss now Turkey and the French presidency of the EU, etc., just because it's the French presidency of the EU, because that's not what matters. What matters is the electoral climate in France, which is moving to the very right. It's very influenced by some very rightist perceptions of the strategic environment. As I started
when you say rightist, you want to say nationalistic?
Nationalist, sovereignist.
Or
patriotic, religious as well.
What is admitted for some countries in the Eastern Mediterranean is not admitted for France. Is that what you mean?
France is it's not only a secular country, but it's a laic country, and it claims to be so. So this is why I think this should not interfere. We can draw differences between how the Turks and the French do appreciate laicité. But the way this principle works into the French political institutions and landscape is different. Normally, we should remain neutral. So I think we'll have a few maybe difficult months ahead if the Turkish government makes moves that are perceived as interferences into the French internal debate. It is very interesting that Sinan used this word as well, interference, thinking that the French are interfering into the Greek-Turkey relations. So you know that Emmanuel Macron himself openly said that he feared Turkish interference in the presidential election in France. I think we're entering again a tense period, maybe, but we know at the state level, at the overall diplomatic systemic level, we know we have to work with Turkey, and it worked. So I think this is also why I'm trying again to draw this France-Turkey agreement out of this strictly everyone's building a front against the Turks, you know, environment. I think it does play a lot deeper into the EU vision of Emmanuel Macron, into his grand geostrategical vision of the world. And I think we should not underestimate the sensitivity that was raised by the AUKUS péripétie, as we say in France. I insist that for instance, the selling of the frigate to Greece with the subsequent reappearance of the American offer, etc., was really seen as a way to compensate for the offense, as it was seen, of France being excluded from AUKUS. So the Mediterranean in some way is a compensation for what's playing in the Pacific. Related to that, there was an interesting discussion we had with the Greek ambassador here in France, saying that the Greeks are also very interested in the Indo-Pacific perspective, also because they have a very important Greek diaspora in Australia, especially. So what is the more fascinating to this study that we conducted is to see the strategic status of Greece changing and the strategic outlook of Greece progressing and moving out of this obsessional face-à-face with Turkey. I think that's the most important lesson that we have to draw from this work that we did. That's the most interesting for me.
And that this face-à-face you described with Turkey is also a sign of the new power acquired by Turkey.
Yes, of course. This is France also the point I made earlier.
France is a kind of mirror of the power Turkey is looking for.
We know France has difficulties to adapt, to adjust to this new Turkish profile. I mean, it's playing into this very, long-term historical perception of France as being the dominant power in a dominant power in the Middle East, and we hoped in some way that the Brexit, even if it makes more difficult even to build strategic European strategic defense, at least it would let us, in peace in the Mediterranean. And another very interesting lesson from this research that we did is that it was absolutely impossible to get any statement from the UK regarding Cyprus. We tried by all means, never worked.
I don't want to frustrate anybody if someone wants to add something. If not, we all agree to put an end to this fascinating question. Okay. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Çok teşekkürler. I wish you a very good day and thank you for this very cooperative and constructive discussion this morning, organized by the Ifri and the
CATS SVP
by Dr. Schmidt. Thank you
Merci,
very
Christian.
much. Bye bye.
Have a good day. Bye bye. À bientôt. C'est bon, il reste qui là?
Je pense que je vais mettre fin.
Oui, fermez, vous pouvez fermer.
Ouais.
Bye bye tout le monde.
À tout à l'heure.